REA.
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 Audio.
REA Audio.
REA Audio.
REA Audio.
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 REA Audio.
Reemployability.
So Scott, thank you so very much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule. I say that to like everybody that's on this podcast, but for you, man, like I really mean it. Like I can't get over the energy and the stuff that you are so into. And I kind of gave a little bit of a background on the intro to this particular podcast, but nobody can do it as well as you do. So do you mind just kind of laying it out, just setting the stage for what you're doing now and kind of where you came from?
Yeah, sure. I'll actually go in the order that you kind of reverse it. Is, where I come from is grew up in a little logging town in Mount Ida, Arkansas. Shout out to my peeps, my 1,036 peeps in that town there. And we didn't even have a stoplight, and about 14 years old, a Green Beret walks into our soda shop, and the guy looked like something out of a movie, right? Like out of a recruiting poster. And he was in town on leave. And I went up immediately and talked to this guy. I was a runt of a kid, little bitty guy. And he was, not only did he look cool, but he was just such a great guy. And there was just something about the way he walked in the room, just kind of it wasn't even a strut. It was just like a swagger. And the guy was so worldly and so, you could just tell he had lived. I mean, maybe 28 years old, like a pretty young fella, but in that moment, he was everything I wanted to be. And when he sat down and talked with me, he told me that he was a Green Beret. The formal title is U.S. Army Special Forces, and his name was Mark. And he just explained to me how like there's all these elite units like the SEALs and Delta Force, but the Green Berets are very different in that they jump into places that are low trust and high stakes, and they build relationships over time. And then they help the little guy stand up against the big guy. And they do that based off the trust that they build when risk is low. And then they leverage that trust when risk is high. And just everything about that, Todd, was so exciting to me. And I think mainly about this helping the little guy stand up against the big guy, because I was truly a runt, and it just set a fire in my belly at age 14 that never extinguished. I knew right then that's what I was going to do. And as soon as I was able, when I got out of college, I joined the Army, went into Special Forces, and spent 18 of my 23 years working in places like Colombia, Peru, and then mostly Afghanistan after 9/11, and then retired in 2013 after, what had been a solid run. I didn't like where the Army was heading. I was a lieutenant colonel at that point. I didn't like what was happening in Afghanistan. I disagreed with it. And so I turned down the next level of command that I'd been selected for, and I hung it up, and I decided to try to pursue a different path and try to affect change on the outside. And that's what I did. My transition was terrible. A lot of PTS, a lot of survivor's guilt, a lot of loss of purpose, which is a lot of veterans and first responders experience when they change planets from military to civilian. And within 18 months of retirement, I found myself standing in a closet holding a .45 pistol and no intention of walking out. And had a few things not happened in those moments, just serendipity, I don't think I'd be here. And to include my son coming home from school when he, earlier than I expected. And it was humiliating. It was just the lowest point of my life, but it was also a point where I look back on, and it was pretty defining in the sense that I started to kind of climb out of that hole over time, and ironically sharing the story of that moment with other veterans who were in at-risk states, and to help them realize that it wasn't just them going through that. And it started to have a pretty profound effect. So I started asking myself, as I looked around the country at all the division and the lack of purpose, what if I could take the human connection skills that I learned as a Green Beret, which we're pretty good at, and I could teach leaders on the veteran side and the business side to build better connections, better relationships, that would just really light me up. And that's what became my passion. And so I formed Rooftop Leadership on the for-profit side, the Hero's Journey on the nonprofit side. And both of them are built around human connection, storytelling, those old school interpersonal skills that help us make better connections. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
I'm very fortunate here at Reemployability. Deb Livingston, who is the founder and CEO of our company, got involved with you a number of years ago, and she's brought what you teach her as a leader to the senior leadership team, but it also trickles down to everyone that works here. And I was introduced to you a couple of years ago when I started here, and have always admired special forces and just military in general, and all that you all do and give and sacrifice, and the ability for you to take all those things that I believe you've mentioned you still teach a lot of these things, right? To Green Berets, you still do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the stuff I teach on human connection.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, Green Berets have been around, I think, since 1952, one of the oldest, special ops units, but yet, and we, our specialty is human connection, like building rapport and then mobilizing indigenous people to fight back from the inside out. An example of that would be like Ukraine, where Green Berets have been operating in Ukraine for a decade plus. And what you're seeing now is the manifestation of a lot of combat advising and training and relationships over the years. And that's the kind of thing that Green Berets do. And I've always contended that's more it's not just instinct. There's a skill to that. But yet for the longest time in the Green Beret qualification course, we didn't train that. You either had that instinct or you didn't, and you were evaluated on it. If you didn't have it, you were gone. Turns out you can actually train this. You can actually teach purpose-based human connection. There is a skill set. There's a discipline. Business leaders call them the soft skills. I hate that term. If you look at the science of human nature and how we sit on top of the food chain, not because of our fur, fangs, or claws, or, our martial skills that most animals have to like fight. We sit on top of the food chain because we're great at socially grouping with other humans. And that's our superpower, is the social brain, right? But we treat it as a soft skill, an afterthought, something to do, as a HR requirement at the end of the quarter. And it's not. You're leaving tons of value on the table. I explained that to Deb when I first met her, and because she was thinking, how does a Green Beret help me run, reemployability? And I said, I tell you what, join our mastermind and I can show you exactly how work works in life and death works in life and business. She has been the stellar model of that. Like she has taken literally all of it and put it into her arena, in your industry. And it's been astounding, but it's because we're all tied. The bottom line is, as humans, we're all wired the same way, regardless of language or cultural differences or ethnicity. We are meaning-seeking, emotional creatures that are very primal. We're ancient brains struggling to make sense of a modern world. And that's true for all of us. And if we understand those human nature realities and that we're wired to be connected to each other, boy, you can have a lot more influence and impact in what you do. And most leaders are just leaving that value on the table.
The first time I met you, you came in with a couple of folks to help us do some strategy sessions. And I can't recall if it was just before COVID or if it was right after COVID. It might have been right before. Yeah. And we were sitting in the conference room, and I remember you walking in, and just the way you walked in the room, you controlled the room without even saying anything. And it was just the purpose that you had. You walked right in, you sat, and I couldn't tell if it was because, oh, this guy is a, retired colonel, and so he does this all the time, or if there was something more to it. But there was nothing that was intimidating about it. It was almost you felt reassured when you walked in the room. And those are the types of skills, because our conversation afterwards took us in that direction, because you did a lot of things that you talk about in Rooftop that helped us that didn't know you yet really lean in and be open and honest about where we were at that time. And ever since then, I've been trying to absorb as much as I can from Rooftop and all that you do, and trickle that down to our sales team and everybody else here. So it's been phenomenal.
I appreciate that. One thing I'll just add to that, just so you know, but I think it illuminates what we're talking about here, is, I appreciate those comments. And what I've always tried to do is to make a human connection first in every engagement that I do, whether that's with one of my sons, whether that's with, you all in that circumstance where we were kind of meeting for the first time, or with a client or whatever. Our human connections represent some of the greatest value and social capital in what we do. And we're so casual about them in the day-to-day disconnected, materialistic mass technology world that we live in. We blow them off. Mm-hmm. And in reality, those engagements are the gold of what we do, regardless of our industry. And so I learned long ago in special forces, if I walked into a room with, fairly ticked off tribal elders who are tickling the triggers of their AKs, wondering whether to dispatch me or not, I've got to make a connection fast. And so I started to get really deliberate and really intentional about before when I change rooms, if I walk in a new room, what is it with that room that I need to be intentional and present for? And I do this thing called pre-engagement preparation, or PEP. And one part of that, it only takes like 3 minutes, is I ask myself 3 questions. And I did that before I walked in with you all. Who am I? Why am I here? And what do these people need from me? And so, just those 3 questions of validating your identity, getting clear on your purpose for that engagement. And then the last thought on your mind is, what do they need from me? And I believe that if that's the last thing on your mind before you walk in the room, then that sets your intention when you walk in the room. And that's what people see. And they know it without a word said. You can tell if someone's in the room for themselves or if they're in the room to try to figure out what the other party needs and meet that goal. It's a palpable difference.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about a lot of this preparation stuff as we go on today. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, it was evident. It was completely evident. And I can recall coming out away from that session with a lot of really, really good things. And like I said, just a great desire to learn more, because it's helped our business tremendously. That said, as I mentioned, I think right after that, COVID happened, and, you were building Rooftop, it was what, over 2 years ago. So it was in a different phase than what it is now. Reemployability was in a different phase than what it is now. And when COVID happened, you were doing all face-to-face stuff and just like everybody else was. And then everything changed and we couldn't do those things anymore. And you came out with a session, a bunch of modules on how to kind of adapt to COVID and how to work with Zoom. And even when we had to walk in with PPE and how to do those things. And as a group, we went through those modules and it really helped a lot. What I'm curious about was, when COVID happened, did that automatically click in your head like, oh, I've got the answer to all this stuff? Or did it take a lot of planning and preparation? And how did you come up with some of the strategies that you came up with to help folks pivot so quickly? Because it literally was within, I want to say, weeks or a month after everything happened.
Yeah, I appreciate that call out. And, the way I would characterize it is, no, I did not have the answers. In fact, much like most of the small business owners, when COVID hit, it was, oh, crap, what are we going to do? Because every gig we had was, like you said, in person, and they just canceled like in minutes. Our whole year was gone. Yeah. And, I've got, just like you all, I've got associates on my team I have to worry about and their families. And no, there was that moment. And, so what did happen though, and I like to believe that it's possible for anyone, is that I did draw from my experience in very chaotic, complex environments that I had dropped myself into with my teammates over the years. And you start to think about things a little differently. You start to think about chaos and complexity a little bit differently, and recognizing that, the world, the arena we live in is by definition chaos. We bring order to our own lives. It is a bit of a facade. We create order, but then whenever the universe or your higher power or God wants to drop in that little ball of chaos, it's going to happen. And I just came to terms with that a long time ago and recognized that that's something I can't control. I can't control the insertion of chaos from the externals. Like, that's going to happen. What I can control is how I respond to it. And I can control how I think about it and my emotions. So a lot of it in that sense, Todd, was getting my own emotional temperature under control and not letting my primal fear of resources and status, which is what drives all of us, take over not let the elephant take over the rider, do my diaphragmatic breathing. And then I just dropped into, okay, what I always do in those moments is, what do the people to the left and right of me need right now? I found that if I go in my own head and start going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I fail epically in hard times. If I drop into my body and just go, all right, look to your left, look to your right. What do people need right now? Where can I serve? That typically opens doors to the next thing. And that's been true for me in combat. It's been true for me in, business. And in that moment, that's what I did. I started thinking about, okay, well, people are going to have to communicate differently than they've ever done. I've done a lot of that in special forces on remote using different video connections. And I know how to make connections that way and still influence. Let's put something out there as fast as we can go. And then communicated that to the team, and we went. And, I'm like a 9 quick start on the scale of 10. So
Right.
we went fast.
Yeah. No, and it was very helpful. It was tremendous. In fact, excuse me, we still go back and look at some of that stuff because, as we are coming out of things, there's still residual things that are happening. And I want to talk to you a little bit about all of the little out branches of COVID, I call them, right? Like my thought was, when COVID happened, we would be shut down for 2 weeks, maybe a month. And then everything would be turned back on and everything would be great, right? We've had these scares before, but it's never been taken to this level. But as you know, and as everybody's listening knows, we went through COVID, and then we had social unrest, and then we had an election, and then we had this, and then we had that, and then now we're talking about a war in Ukraine and all these little things. And I know the war, that's not necessarily associated with COVID, but I feel like everything's kind of connected a little bit, it almost feels like today we as a society are living off the next drama, right? Like, I'm not a big drama guy. I got a teenage daughter at home, and everything is drama. I try to stay away from it as much as I possibly can. But I feel like with social media, like we are living on the next drama, the next drama, the next drama. Do you feel that same way? And how do you counteract that? I mean, you can do it yourself because of the things that you do personally, but how do you help other people to not focus on the drama?
I think that's a really great question. I'm pulling up an article right now, Todd, that I hope that you'll share with your listeners. It's in the Atlantic most recently. It just came out, and it's called and I'm going to share it with you after this podcast, but it's Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid.
I read the headline, but I didn't read the article. I just saw it the other day. Yeah.
Phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And, it speaks to a lot of what we're talking about. So let's just unpack this a little bit. I mean, again, I think it's important for us as leaders, whether you have a title or not, right? If you have a family, you're likely going to lead your family. If you are in a community, you have the potential to lead your community. My thoughts on leadership is, we follow the person, not with the title or the experience, but who is the most relatable to our pain and relevant to our goals. That's who we follow. That's who humans follow. And I've seen this borne out in some of the most low trust, dangerous places on earth, where the person with the rank or the experience was not really followed, whereas the person who was relatable and relevant was. And so this is where I'm coming from on this. The question that I want to ask myself all the time is, how can I be the most relatable to people's pain and the most relevant to their goals in the moments that matter? And, one of the things on that is to realize that there is chaos all around us, and we can't control that. It is out of our control. And to spend energy on that or time on that, worrying about that, is an expenditure of energy that I don't have. And leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you, according to Professor James Clausen. So that's the first thing is, how do I just think about the arena? And the arena is going to throw things, like you said, Ukraine, COVID, the next crisis, into my face. The question is, do I have the resilience to navigate through it and come out on the other side still thriving? That's the key. And a lot of that, if not most of it, is self-leadership. It's all about how we manage our own emotional temperature, how we regulate our state, how we frame what's happening to us instead of, for us instead of to us, and just really navigate the complexity to come out on the other side. And a lot of times paralysis is what jams us up, is we freeze. When something happens, we just freeze. And I've found that, like, in times of chaos and complexity, the first thing I want to do is move. I want to get some kind of action underway, not recklessly, but I want to do some kind of movement, because movement and meaning are inextricably linked for mammals. When we start to move, we start to get clarity. Maybe you've experienced this, like if you've ever had like a wave of emotion hit over you, of sadness, grief. If you sit still, you literally hold your breath, and it's like terrible. But if you just move, you start to find meaning and focus again. And so I think it's those kinds. It's how do I lead myself first, and through those initial moments, and then how do I show up as relatable and relevant to the other party, and really focus on being relatable and relevant, relatable and relevant, relatable and relevant. And then the next thing will happen, right? I'll find what the next thing is that I need to do. And if I just stay there, it's when I start thinking about how am I doing? Oh my God, what's happening? Oh, what am I going to do? That's when we drowned, but those are my thoughts on it. I spend a lot of time on this. I wrote a book called Leading Through Chaos. It's a little book that I wrote during the pandemic, that I took my lessons learned in crisis management and combat. And I think it's got a lot in it that people could use, but at a high level, that's how I think about it.
Yeah. My son played baseball. I think your boys played ball too, right? And I can recall we have a close friend who is a professional tennis coach, and he kind of helped coach the team here and there. And I remember going to him and saying, Craig, my son, he just won't be aggressive at the plate. What can I do to make him more aggressive at the plate? And he said, Todd, if he doesn't know he needs to be more aggressive at the plate and doesn't believe he needs to be, there's nothing you can tell him that's going to make him be more aggressive. You know what I mean? And so that was like an epiphany to me. There's people out there that if they don't know that they need to do some things internally so that they're not constantly bouncing from the next piece of drama to the next, there's nothing really that we can do other than lead by example, I guess. Right.
Great point. That's a great point. And if you look at the world today, like just look at, I believe that, as humans, so we respond to, the other thing is that I'm really big on is understanding our own nature, and as modern humans, we've gotten away from our own nature. We've lost connection to kind of our traditional past. And there's just things about our nature, Todd, that haven't changed in thousands and thousands of years. For example, we're mostly energy. So when we are confronted with a crisis or something that is an environmental concern, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. Like that's a sympathetic response that our nervous system has. We go into a trance-like state. Again, to your listeners, if you've ever been in a car crash or a life and death situation, or someone jumped out and scared you, you had this visceral primal response where you felt needles in your skin and everything went to tunnel vision and things moved in slow motion. Like all of those are responses that our body does at an autonomic level to survive. And what happens is that's a trance-like state. We go into a trance to do what we have to do to survive, and this happens to us all the time. When a crisis comes in on us, we have a similar fight, flight, or freeze response. But instead of, an episodic fleeting response to a saber-toothed tiger, now I'm having the same response to my 401k eroding for 9 months. And that's not healthy. It's not what we're wired to do, and it's not appropriate for the reality that I'm in. But my old brain doesn't know the difference. Yeah. And so I have to figure out that, all right, the primal part of my brain is going to respond, unless it's trained, to these chaotic, as you call, drama moments in a way that's not appropriate. And my child will do the same. My coworker will do the same. My employees will do the same. And rather than fault them, let's just recognize they're not trained, lead ourselves first, bring our emotional temperature down, and then help other people navigate through it by modeling what it should look like.
Thanks for listening this week to ReAudio. If you have any comments or suggestions for an upcoming episode, please let us know. You can email Todd at reemployability.com. Also, please follow REA Audio on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check out more content at listentorea.com. Next week, we continue with Scott, digging deeper into some techniques to make you more resilient and relevant at work, in your community, and at home. So have a fantastic rest of your week.